Welcome to Community Radio, for and by Indigenous, Black, and racialized people with disabilities, designed to share our stories and experiences as we navigate the world. Operating on the land of many traditional territories, Community Radio is recorded on Turtle Island and Inuit Nunavut. Our participants' stories and opinions are that of their own and represent as such. As a young girl, Cindy immigrated to Canada, flipping her world on its head. A new country, new language, and a new name. Like many Indigenous, Black, and racialized youth, Cindy was faced with the pressure of assimilation. In this episode, Cindy shares her story of resilience and being the first in her family to break educational and employment barriers. Presenting this week's guest, Cindy, on excellence, assimilation, and impact, a story of resilience and triumph.
Welcoming everyone back. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Community Radio. As I mentioned before, we have a wonderful guest for you today. So first, I'll just ask our guest, could you state your name and pronouns, please?
My name is Cindy Christensen. My previous name was Nguyen Thi Kim Hoang. So I was born in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. In 1989, there was a lot of conflicts, lots of issues post-war Vietnam. I moved to Canada in 2000. So I grew up in Canada. I spent about a winter or so in Saskatchewan. And then after that, my mom and we moved to Calgary, Alberta for better opportunities. And everyone was saying, move to Calgary, Alberta. That was the place to be. So I grew up there. It was a really nice time, but it was also a big shock for me, going from plus 35 degrees every single day and to like negative 35 in the winter and having to watch the weather channel whenever you leave your house and making sure that you have like the proper clothing. So yeah, and then now I just recently moved to Ottawa, Ontario. So I work for the government of Canada and I'm trying to bring all my, personal experience, all my professional experience, everything that I've experienced from Vietnam to Canada to other places that I've lived into my career as I grow and mature as a person.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to get into your story some more. So as always, I'm your community learning coordinator, Amira, and Cindy has a beautiful story to share with us today and some awesome advice as well. So let's get right into it. So what were your experiences growing up with a disability and being part of a racial minority? And for you, how did those identities intersect?
hmm So, growing up in an Asian first generation immigrant family, having like a disability was really looked down upon and misunderstood. I didn't have a disability until in my late 20s, but however, in my family, there were many family members with a disability. For my grandma, she tried to escape the Vietnam War, so she was one of those boat people. And unfortunately, she was stuck on an island, and due to malnutrition, lack of access to food, and things like that, she just ended up being in a wheelchair for most of her life. So when she left Vietnam, she was able to walk. And when she came back, she wasn't able to walk anymore. So a lot of the people, that was really strange. There was no help for her. We also, as a family, didn't understand if it was something that was permanent or something that she could recover. We don't know what happened to her on the refugee island when she stayed there. It's something she never talked about, but it was really sad and also frustrating because there was no help for her. And then after that, my one of my cousin who grew up with a disability, like a mental disability. And for me as a child, again, I left Vietnam when I was 10. So I interacted with him from the age of 5 to, 8 or so. And for me, he was just a normal person who looked at the world in a different way. Like, yeah, a little teary because I remember one time he was cooking for me, and instead of using like a pot, he used a pan to cook ramen. And for me, that's totally normal. And he explained that because we don't have a lot of water, so by cooking it,
Mm.
it's less water. It would just make it cook faster. You're using less water, more sustainable. You're using less like materials because we didn't have electricity. We would cook it by like wood. So it's like a wood
Mm.
stove. And for me, that's like, oh my God, you're a genius. But for other people in like communist Vietnam, it was like witchcraft. And yeah, they were just like, oh my God, it's different. Like this person is not normal. He couldn't get like a job, and in Vietnam, like you start working really young, like 6 years
Yeah.
old. Like my mom told
Wow.
me, she would have to, like sell uh fruits and things like that when she was 6 years old because there was just no food. Like you have to survive, find a way to survive, and school was something that is not even like, thought about. So children
Mm.
start working very young. So he was a teenager. He started working really young. He would do like construction labor. There's no gloves, and he would just like grab things with his hands, like cement got into his skin and it would peel off. So it was definitely like child labor, but looking back, I didn't know because everyone was just working as a child.
Of course.
Yeah. And that's why we moved to Canada because they don't have
Oh.
child labor and rules and regulations. But unfortunately, he just couldn't take it anymore, and he took his own life when he was 7. I was 7, and he was maybe a little older than me. But yeah, for my family, it was just something almost like a relief, unfortunately,
Mm.
because it's like this strange person that is different from us, that is an outcast, is no longer
Mm.
our problem, and we never talked about it. Um, my mom, like his mother, which is my aunt, like she was almost like, okay, like it's not my problem anymore. But in a way, like as a child, like I still remember him because he babysat me. He like allow me to look at things in a different way, like learning how to cook things in a different way. So I thought that was just something that was really unique and special. But then
Mm.
at a very young age, like 7 or 8, I started questioning normal people.
Ah.
People, yeah, people that didn't have a disability, people that
Mm.
thought, like maybe this is how things are. I started to question that logic and think maybe like maybe they're the different ones. Yeah, I started to think differently, and I became like a little bit rebellious, and started to
Mm.
have my own thoughts at 8, 7 or 8, which was really great looking back, but also scary. But yeah, just to summarize it, in an Asian community, because of so many like trauma, especially living in like a communist country, like you
Mm.
don't want to be different. I mean, we
Yeah.
see what happens when you do things differently in North Korea. So
Yeah.
even though Vietnam is not North Korea, there are still social norms. Maybe it's not
Mm.
spoken, maybe it's not written down, but there are things that are still there that families have to live with, and they try their best just to survive and be normal and just to, like pass the time so that they could survive like another day, another month.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think it's so important for people to remember that trying to fit in or assimilate it in many ways, while it's harmful, it's a survival technique. And it's, as you said, to go against the grain isn't always it's not just I want to be different. It's not safe to do that. It's not necessarily the social norm to do that. So there's so many reasons why that has a historical importance. And so you've shared a little bit about your background and about a little bit of coming to Canada, but I wonder if you want to share a little bit more of your story. If yeah, lay it on us.
Yeah, so I always try to fit in, be normal, especially living in communist Vietnam. when I came to Canada, because Vietnam was colonized by the French, and then
Mm.
after that, the Americans came. A lot of people actually spoke French and Vietnamese, not by choice, but because, that's was brought upon us like many other
Mm.
countries. So when I came to Canada, I knew people here spoke French and English, and I totally thought that the whole country would speak English and French. So there
Ah.
was me speaking French. Like I remember being on the airplane, seeing all the signs in French, and I was like, oh yeah, like I understood things, like I could survive in this country. And then I came to Calgary in grade 5, and it was a huge shock because like I could not speak English. And being in grade 5, people were just like, why are you like speaking French? Like it's recess. You don't need to keep speaking French to get extra points. And having to like explain that to children, like in my country, we were colonized by French people, and
Mm.
now like we, have to speak French. And
Mhm.
it was just like really strange. But I didn't grasp the concept until later on, like in my 20s and 30s. I didn't even understand what colonization was. Like for
Yeah.
me, it was just like these rich people that came and like gave you books and, try to erase your culture. But for me, it's like, oh, you can't afford to go to school. So these people just came, they gave you books, it's free tuition, you try and dress properly, like then
Mm.
and then they give you clothes because you can't even afford clothes. So for me, it was just like, oh, they're our saviors, but that's what they told us, right?
Right.
Yeah. So when I came here, it was like, no, we don't really speak French here. Like, and there's Quebec French versus, the Parisian French that I learned. It was really confusing, messy for children
Mm.
to understand. So I totally understand why. Like now, especially with immigrant children, they get very
Mm.
upset. They're unable to fit into school because our expectation is immigrants, it's totally different than when we come to Canada. But again, I'm like very grateful for all the opportunities that I received, and all the education that I've received, because otherwise, like I wouldn't be able to receive any of them if I stay in Vietnam. But
Mm.
as I grow older, there's information that I take in. So I'm just learning about my past from like
Mm.
a different lens and with more information than I had before. Hmm.
I love that. It's a beautiful way to
Yeah.
kind of summarize
Hmm.
that. But it is, again, for someone like myself who was not an immigrant, something that, we learn as we get older, but is really placed upon you as a child when you are an immigrant is you're kind of being expected to be an adult in many ways of you have to explain all of your culture to other children and you have to fully understand everything, but you yourself are just a child. And so that sort of adultification of minority children is, really not talked about enough, especially in the immigrant experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
So you had mentioned before that you didn't experience having a disability until you got older. So would you like to share a little bit more about how your experience as a racialized person then began to change once you became disabled?
Hmm. Yeah, so there were so many like appointments that I need to go through to get like proper medications for my illness. So I have sleep apnea, and I had to
Mm.
research, and apparently Asians and people with different ethnicity are more susceptible to sleep apnea. So I didn't know
Oh,
that before.
no.
And then I basically kept like coughing, and this was before COVID in 2018, 2019.
Mm.
I went to the hospital. I had to wait a very long time. And when I say cough, it would be like months, like 2, 3 months, like nonstop. So it's definitely not a cold.
Oh,
But
that's
people would just say like, "Oh, it's nothing. Just go home. Just take a Tylenol."
mm.
So I had to really learn for myself and did research for myself and be my own advocate and say like,
Mm,
these are, the symptoms that am experiencing. I think I need to take a blood test for this, or I need an X-ray,
mm,
or need this, need that. So when my mom saw me having a disability, for her, she was like, if I don't recognize it, like if I don't
mm,
support you, it's gonna somehow magically go away. So she would just say, why are you going to so many doctor's appointments? Why
mm,
are you trying to, get better? Like I show her all the test result
mm,
through medical science, and she's like, oh, they could just fake it. It's not real. It's probably just a one-off. And then I do like my testing again. I had like a sleep machine,
mm,
medication for my asthma, thing like that. And she said, oh, it is. She always looked at it as like a negative aspect. And
mm.
she said it could, make it worse. So maybe just like try not to cough anymore. But I'm like, I can't try. I can't do that. But now she's more supportive. I explained to her that I will
Mm,
stick around. It's not it's not something that is, like I'm still gonna thrive. I'm still gonna be able to work. I just need
mm,
certain accommodations, like when I go to an office and it's really small, like the doors are closed, it's really small, there's no ventilation, like I might need to just have the door open, or maybe instead of a one-on-one in a closed space, if my manager can just walk and talk with me down the
mm,
hallway. Like I am very open about my disability. When I cough, it could be like an allergic reaction. I'm not, bringing
mm.
COVID to the workplace, things like
Yeah.
that. So I feel like in my 20s and 30s, I'm still learning a lot more about it. And
Mm.
I find myself as being an advocate for myself, but for other people, and explaining to them like, hey, don't be afraid. I'm not gonna get you sick unless you somehow get sleep apnea as well.
It's letting people know, hey, sleep apnea is not contagious.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's understandable, but especially going through COVID where people are so heightened fear of coughing and things, I'm sure that that was not a great experience and that will kind of trickle on for a while, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So I wanted to talk about one of the things that we had talked about when we had initially met was just the resilience that you have in general as a person. And so how do you think all of these experience has made you as a racialized person with a disability resilient?
hmm Yeah, so like I mentioned before, growing up, I was taught just to assimilate, especially being Vietnamese and having that
Mm,
post-war experience. It was always something that was in the back of my mind, like don't ask for more medication, don't ask for more
mm,
appointments. I felt like I was almost a burden to the system. And I try
mm,
not to, see the doctors as many times as I should have. But again, like I feel like it's also up to the doctors to get me, as a Canadian,
mhm,
proper treatment, proper medications. A lot of the doctors, they were general doctors, and they didn't
mm,
know how to properly treat anything that was special, like a specialist would. So
mm,
a lot of the doctors would send me to like a specialist, and then the specialist would then send the result to the doctor, and the doctor would explain to me. But it was really hard for me to just go to a specialist and
yes.
talk to them. I always have to like go back. So it was a lot of back and forth. Like I'm not being a burden to
Mhm,
the healthcare system. And now I see that it is broken, to be honest.
mm,
I should be able to just talk to the specialist and not have to go through like a middle doctor. And yeah, it was something that was really frustrating. And
mm,
once I understood that I am not a burden, like the system needs to be change a little bit. I started to become a little bit more happy, like being okay with my disability, talking to my manager, making sure that I get the proper support. Even though, some people are not very open to it or
Yeah.
they even understand it because I have a non-apparent disability.
Yeah.
So when I am in a meeting and I have to take notes, everything is fine. All of a sudden, like, there's a change in the air or someone's wearing perfume. I just start to cough and I literally need to leave the meeting. And at
Mm,
first, it was really like weird because they're like, why is she leaving the meeting? But it could be
yeah.
really dangerous, like when I'm having an asthma attack, and only I know like my own body. So I find that it's okay to just take care of myself. Like don't
Mm,
worry about what people think. So that's why when I come into work, like I tell people right away like what I have and my space and things like that. So now people don't wear perfume, they don't have a lot of things that could trigger me. So it's a lot better after COVID for my
good.
illness actually.
Good. And I remember you were speaking a little bit last time about just generational understanding and resilience. Did you have anything you wanted to add there about generational understanding of
Yeah.
disability and how that's impacted you?
Yeah, so for me, it has made me a lot stronger and tougher as a person. I'm able to educate other, whether it's
Mm,
my own family or, just my manager, people around me. I feel like, again, I was taught to assimilate, to blend in as a young
hmm
person and to just keep my head down, pretend everything's okay. But as I grew older, I came to realize that ignoring it, the disability is not going to go away. Like we need to
hmm
somehow make it work as a family. Like my mom has to deal with my disability whenever I talk to her and she can hear that I'm coughing and I tell her, hey,
mm,
I just need a break from our conversation or my manager, things like that. I feel like that not talking about it doesn't make it go away.
mm.
I feel like we should talk about it. We should advocate for ourselves, like make sure people understand what's going on. Because at the end of the day, like we are gonna have to all live together. So
Mm.
it's great to just learn more about each other and be open-minded.
That's such a good point. Just especially with all living together, we
Hmm.
don't think about, well, many people don't think about that often. So thank you for been touching on that. Okay, so for the listeners, you may not have been aware, but we have a Harvard grad in our midst. So, Cindy, tell us about your experience as a racialized person with a disability. Tell us about Harvard. We would love to hear about the journey. This is incredible.
Mhm. So I actually didn't tell anyone that I got into Harvard. Not even like my mom kind of knew, but for me, it was really shocking. So
Mm,
I sent in my letter, I got accepted, but in a way, it was like unless I finish it, I'm not gonna jinx it. I'm not gonna tell
mm,
anyone. So I didn't even tell my close friends. No one knew until I graduated. They were like, "When did you
wow.
get in?" And now you're done because as a racialized person and someone that is not American, I don't get
Mm,
the same access as other
mhm,
people. So, for example, there are certain scholarship for a low income individual, but you have to be American. So I couldn't get
oh,
access to that. Also
mm,
being like the first person that graduated from university. For my bachelor, I went to U of C, University of Calgary, and that was
mm,
already like a miracle. And then for my master, I went to Harvard. It was also a miracle, but I didn't have that experience of asking someone like my mom
mm,
what it was like, being in college. Like, are there certain courses? Should I, talk to my
mm,
supervisor? Should I look for like jobs after? like
Mm,
questions that are not even related to financial stuff, like just mm, life questions. So I didn't have that access. And again, I felt very alone, but it was because I didn't want to tell anyone because I
mm,
was very, very nervous, and it's still shocking that I graduated and I am an alumni now. But I would say
awesome.
like I went to America to Cambridge, which is across from Boston. And again, being, a low income person, I didn't have the same access to housing. I couldn't have a house
Mm,
on campus. So my house was in a very poor, like rundown neighborhood in Cambridge. The walls was just like falling apart. There was mold everywhere. It was really bad. But then because of that, every day I would spend my time like just studying at the Weiner Library, which is
mm,
super beautiful. And it was wonderful, and I read a lot. And then also food, things like food. I couldn't afford to, buy food
mm,
on campus because it was in US dollars and it was so expensive. But I just took, course by course and took whatever
mhm,
course I needed to take. And I really lucked out because I had chosen the thesis route. So for a thesis, you don't have to take as many courses. So
mm,
for my master, I did a thesis on bike sharing and environmental management. So I looked at all the different bike shares programs around the world. My supervisor was very supportive. I didn't tell
mm,
him about my disability. I didn't tell him that I was low income because I didn't want to
mm.
be treated differently. And it's that
Right.
assimilation idea again. So I really had a
Mhm,
hard time because it took me like, so at first I did it in 2 years and I had to take a break. So I took about
mm,
4 years off and then I came back part-time and I finished it another 2 years. So it was a very, very long time, but I completed it and I pay whatever I could. But looking back, I think I would, completely ask for help from my
mm.
professors and maybe ask for like more financial help. Now
Yeah.
we live in a world where there's mentorship that's online. Like back
Mm,
when I went to school 2017, 2015, there was no online mentorship. Like you have to be in the same city as the person. Zoom, Skype, MS Team, like that was not the
mm,
norm. So you have to be there in person. And it was really, really difficult for me, but I'm really proud of it. And again, I didn't want to receive any special treatment. I just took
mm,
it course by course, completed what I needed to do. And then at the very end in 2019, I saw after I completed all my courses, I saw in my inbox, at like 10 p.m. On that day. I forgot what day it was, but it said, hey, do you want to submit your commencement speech, and we're gonna have like a prize of I think it was 1,500 US dollars, so
wow.
not that much, but I was like, I've never written like a speech before, and I was not a very good student at the University of Calgary, like I barely pass, but C's get degrees, so for
There you
Harvard
go.
I got like B's, so then it was like almost midnight. It was like 11 and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna submit this speech. And I remember clicking send at 11:59 and it was due at midnight. So I clicked send. I clicked send. I forgot about it, a month or two went by. And
Mm,
then I received like an email that said, congrats, you're gonna be like the class speaker. So I was like, wow.
mm,
But for me, I was really happy about the monetary prize. Would help a lot with my student loans. And my supervisor saw my name and then he said, "Oh, Cindy, when the speech came in, just so you know, I didn't give you any special treatment because it was like numbered." Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. And he's like, we really like this speech and we picked it. and there was like a
Mm.
panel of people that picked this speech. And in the speech, I basically wrote it on my experience, and I talked about, having to pay course by course, taking
Mm.
longer than I did, also having to stay up at night because I was also working full time during the day and working
Oh.
on thesis at night. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people with family and
Mm.
children that had to go back to do like a master that really
Yeah.
resonated with them and they really liked it.
Yeah.
So they picked it because it was not, something that was like, oh, I was the best person. I did like amazing and I got all A's and now I'm, giving this speech as my like master. It was very honest and truthful. So
Mm.
that's why it was picked. And I gave a speech in Cambridge on graduation day, and it was really, really nice. My mom didn't come to the graduation because she was working as a dry cleaner and she was making
Mm.
minimum wage, like 15 an hour, no vacation
Mm.
days. She
Yeah.
didn't come, but now that, I'm in the system as an alumni, like I hope someday I can go back and show her the school and you can always go back there. So it's very nice.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to ask you one side question,
Mhm.
outside of the questions I'd given. So as you
Mhm.
know, our channel is called Community Radio. And so something I wanted to ask all of our participants is who makes up your community, whether that be organizations, individuals, who is your community and how do they support you?
hmm I feel like because I'm still learning about my disability, even though I've had
Mm.
it for 5 years now, I feel like sometimes you see people that are supportive of you, but they
Mm.
just want to hire you just so they check off that box, or you know,
Mm.
I don't want to call them fakes or phonies, but I feel like it's almost like, oh, you are a disabled person or you're racialized, you're a woman, let's check off this box, that box. And
Mm.
I feel like I'm more than just those boxes. Like I graduated from Harvard. I can speak, like some French, Vietnamese. I've traveled. I've done so many other things. I'm not just
Mm.
a bunch of boxes. Like I can also have a fair competition. I can
Yeah.
write articles, essays. But then there are people that are really true allies, and I can kind of
Mm.
sense them like whenever I talk to them, even though, like the other day I spoke to someone and she said, it's very different working for the government because there's all these boxes that you need to check and all these classification. So she really took time to like explain to me and
Mm.
explain that this is the right way to go about applying or moving up a step. If someone is telling you this, that it might not be true. So
Mm.
she was really nice and she took the time. And from just her conversation with me, I could tell that this is something that she believes in and she's
Mm.
passionate about. So sometimes when I come across these allies, I feel like, okay, like, the world is not so bad. There are people out there that are really kind and they're trying to push the boundaries. It's
Mm.
definitely very, very hard being a racialized, disabled
Mm.
person that's trying to just make a living and be, successful and thriving like any normal person would want to. Yeah, so I would say allies in my
Mm.
community. I really like to learn from others because
Yeah.
there's so many different types, ethnicity,
Mm.
disabilities. Everyone
Mm.
are living in Canada and they're just trying to, we're just trying to be a very peaceful country.
Mm.
Of course, it's not perfect. Like we do have our own problems, but we all came from somewhere else and our parents or maybe us chose to live in Canada. And there
Mm.
were times, like honestly, I was very frustrated with the healthcare system, and I
Mm.
thought, I don't want to be in Canada anymore. Like, why is it so slow? But now I feel like this
Mhm.
this is kind of like our family, and we're not stuck with it, but our family, like we could choose to leave or we could try and fix it. And I'm in a phase where I'm trying to fix things to like my
Yeah.
mom, educate her, teach her about disability, teach her about like that she can go to the doctors and seek help, especially now that she's a senior. Like they're not gonna, go after your family. It's not a communist
Mm.
country. Like it's okay to give your ID and have people know where you live. So just things like that.
Yeah.
Again, I would feel my community would be just a bunch of allies, people with different stories, organizations
Yeah.
like yourself that are really supportive of people, allow them to speak and allow people to learn different types of disabilities and different
Mm.
backgrounds. It's really great. Hmm.
Thank you.
Hmm.
And so, switching gears back to our regular scheduled questions, we spoke a bit about mental health, I believe, earlier when we had connected. So, how did you find that this intersectionality of identity affected your mental health and mental health journey?
Hmm. I would say it's really hard. I always feel very uncomfortable whenever I speak about mental health because, again, it's something that is very, very foreign for like an
Yeah.
Asian community. In Asia, like it's a very taboo topic. I don't, if you like have depression or you have any kind of mental health challenge, it's very, very difficult to just go to the doctor or a therapist to seek help because they see
Mm.
it as like a waste of money, a waste of resources. Um,
Mm.
Over there, it's just hard enough to survive, to buy rice or buy food, let alone use that money to seek help, to talk to a therapist. So for me, I'm slowly like, thinking that it's okay for me to seek help, and I do use like online
Mm.
therapy sessions. Yeah, and it's really great. It's very accessible. I can talk
Mhm.
to a therapist at home like this. I don't have to go out, and it's very convenient. So I think we live in a time where people are trying to make healthcare more accessible,
Yeah.
education more accessible, therapy more accessible. So I'm still learning, of
Mhm.
course, about my own mental health and about different ways that you can get access to mental health. Mhm,
Absolutely.
mhm,
It's a very new concept, I think, to even consider mental health as something that's important. I think is
mhm,
in the West, even it was kind of mental health is only important if you're mentally unwell, and that has to visibly look like something, but everyone else is, and I'm doing strong air quotes for anyone just listening, fine. And now
mhm,
we're realizing, it's a whole holistic approach, just like you wouldn't say physical health is only if your body is just unable to do what it used to do and is slowly breaking down in pain. Mental health is, it's a holistic approach. Mental health is a journey and we're constantly working on it. So thank you. Yeah, let's normalize going to therapy and seeking help to support that, especially within racialized communities.
mhm.
Um, Within your episode, we really wanted to talk about the workforce a little bit because this is a lot of your expertise as well. So just wanted to know if you could talk a bit more about your experience in the workforce and what advice you have for other Indigenous, Black, and racialized people navigating the workforce for their careers.
Yeah. So living in Canada, it's so diverse. There's tons of, things you can learn now online, and you can have
Mm.
access to education and information. So I think it's really important to educate ourselves, take in all the resources. I work for the government of Canada, and
Mhm.
there are still some challenges, but we are trying to make it more accessible for everyone. I feel like it's still very, very challenging for people, especially like first generation immigrants, to know like what types of jobs are good, because we were told, the running joke is that, Asian parents want their children to be doctors, lawyers,
Yeah.
engineers. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of like the joke. But there
Mm,
are other types of jobs that could make people happy. Like I saw a
mm.
job posting the other day. It was like chief happiness officer.
Cool.
So it was like really cool. I'm like, how do I get to become that? Or like, things like working in TV, in the radio, being a writer, because all those
Mm,
jobs in like, obviously communist country, it's all controlled by
mm.
the state. So you don't get to think like, am I allowed to like write my own stories? Like, am I allowed
Mm.
to speak about myself and my history, or am I
Okay.
allowed to write like a fantasy novel, like in North Korea or wherever, if it doesn't fit a certain mole, like you might get in a lot of trouble. So yeah,
Mm,
it's very like we don't understand like how lucky we are living in Canada, that yeah,
mm.
people are upset about different things. They can go and they can protest, and
Yes.
protesting in Canada is very different than protesting in the Middle East, or we've seen things
Hmm.
like in Hong Kong,
Yes.
Taiwan, China. Like it's very, very different. So yeah, I feel like the workforce here, parents need to understand that there are different types of jobs out there for different
Yeah.
types of people. So you could be like a disabled writer. You could just sit there, write about your own story. Like it might be like an amazing, like inspirational story people love to read. We
Hmm.
shouldn't just like society again are trying to put us in these different types of boxes. Like we shouldn't put ourselves in boxes, we should try and get out of the box. So I think it's time to speak up and let others know.
Mm.
I myself am like a very introverted, shy person. I'm not very
Mm.
confident, but as I learn more about my disability, as I talk to more people, I think it's okay to speak up, to like accept other people who are different
Mm.
from you. It might be a little strange to think of, certain jobs. Maybe it's very new to some people,
Mm.
or even like, asking for a promotion,
Yeah.
pay raise, or telling like your manager, hey, I think I could do more. I think I'm like underemployed. Because the beauty of it is if you're being like treated unfairly at work in Canada, there are certain process you could complain to. You have
Hmm.
EI to fall back to. Like
Mm.
there's so many safety nets that are really good that we don't think of. So we should always speak up and make sure that it's not, the norm to have all these people, normal people, step all over us. Yeah.
No, it's such a good point. And for the listeners and viewers, one of the things I will put link in the description of this video is a list of some of just the rules for accessibility for employment within Canada. Because, as you said, Cindy, there's so many things in place in terms of anti-discrimination and just policies of accommodations that you're meant to be given and accessibility that is just the standard. And while, as you said, it's not perfect, we're definitely taking steps in the direction. So I'll make sure that we have access to that as well. Know your rights so that you're able to speak up.
hmm
So my next question for you, Cindy, is what advice do you have for young Indigenous, Black, and racialized people, some of who are listening with disabilities, for navigating their identities and just seeking to make their voices heard in the world?
hmm I would say like don't be afraid of taking up leadership roles. As I see in the workforce, there's a lot of people that are, racialized,
Mm.
disabled, low income. Yes, we can work in offices, we can have jobs, but if you look at leadership in the government, in companies, different companies in tech, in healthcare. It's always, I don't want to point it out, but it's fairly obvious that it's not the group that is so diverse in Canada. So, what happened there? Why are people being kept at this level and not being moved up to the next level? Like it's almost like we are either not given the proper opportunities to move up, or we are afraid. And again, speaking from my own experience, my mom, she was really afraid of me, speaking up or even asking for a raise. She was working at a minimum job, minimum wage job for years. She didn't have any vacation dates. It was very normalized, just be like, okay, you have a job, just stay there and be okay with getting paid the
Yeah.
minimum wage. So I would feel like, for those who are listening, create opportunities for yourself, like look at leadership roles and see how you can get there. Like maybe, that person had like a master or they have certain designation qualification that took them there. Like be your own advocate. Like, don't let others decide for you. If no one is going to give you those opportunities, like maybe you have to create your own organization. And in Canada, there's so much funding for like nonprofits, social enterprises all over. There's so many communities, rural communities in Canada that needs help, and there's no one there because people kept going to the city. So I think, if there's no opportunities like created for yourself, but make sure you do the work, make sure you put in the work and do a lot of research and find something that you're passionate in. Mhm.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with so many points there. And I think it's so important for us as double marginalized people to really remember two things can be true at once. You can love the country you live in or the rights that we have and be so happy to have them. And you can demand that we do better. You can speak up to say, you know what, that's great. We deserve more. You don't have to just be, happy with what you're given, in the sense that it's not that you're not grateful, it's that you can see we can progress so much more. So as Cindy said, you touched on so many great points there. Use that. Um, so continuing on that, Cindy, what are your hopes for the future in terms of how society treats and views individuals who are at this intersection of being racialized and having a disability?
Mhm. I hope that it becomes like more normalized to see diverse groups of people in the workforce. Like
Mm.
both of us were wearing glasses. That was
Yeah,
also a very stigmatized thing in Asian culture. And my mom would tell
yeah,
me, if you keep wearing your glasses, your, eyes are gonna get worse. You know,
yeah.
things like taboo things like that. But I,
Mm,
I hope that one day, if you need accommodation, like if you have
mm,
ADHD, if you need to take an elevator up, like instead of the
mm,
stairs, like it's normalized. I think as we grow older, like everyone's aging, like we're just all gonna have different types of disabilities. Because like I
mhm,
said, in my 20s, I thought, people in my family, they have disabilities, but I might never have them. And in my
yeah,
late 20s, I receive, diagnosis from the doctors, and
mm,
now I'm okay with it. So as we grow older, we see like seniors that
mm,
have disabilities, like it's just gonna become like a norm. So we should start now. Don't wait for things to be inaccessible. Like don't wait for
yeah,
spaces, environment to be accessible, or the workforce to be inaccessible. Old people, some people, especially after COVID, they need to continue to work because, um,
mm,
you have mortgages to pay, you have bills to pay, loans, things like that. And we're seeing more older and older people in the workforce
mm,
with a disability, maybe a parent, maybe not a parent. So I think in the future, we just need to make a lot of accommodation and make
Yeah.
the environment like better for us. I feel like in Europe, I spent a little bit of time there, and they made things quite accessible. For
Mm.
example, like in places like the Netherlands, they have
Yeah.
housing units where the older people, older generation can live and interact with younger people who are going to school. Maybe
Mm.
they can't pay for high rent, but they somehow find like a common thing to get along
Mm.
with. And yeah, I think it would be good just to make like the physical space more accessible and also the workforce, because at the end of the day, like even though work is really important, like we're here to live and to spend time outside. Like everyone's looking forward to their weekends. Like we're not just here to punch in and out. So why not make it accessible for everyone? Hmm.
Absolutely. Let's hope that that's the future we all get to live to see come along. Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
Hmm.
I've asked you a lot of questions today, and we talked about a bunch today and when we'd previously met. But is there anything that I forgot or that has come to mind that you would love to kind of continue to talk about and share with our audience?
Yeah, I feel like now with the advance of technology, because
Mhm.
back in the day, like when I was applying to the University of Calgary, we had to get these like paper brochure to tell you like what courses you need to take, like what you need to do. But now everything is available online. It's so
Mm.
easy to find all this information online. But for new immigrants who
Mm.
maybe have never seen a computer before or have
Mm.
access to open internet because their internet
Mm.
might be different than our internet. So I think we really need to increase like digital accessibility for everyone, for newcomers and maybe people who are living in like rural area, indigenous
Mm.
communities. Like I've seen they don't have access to food sometimes. Like
Yeah.
the food prices are just crazy.
Mm.
Also, sometimes they don't have access to basic things like water. Like
Mhm.
just yeah, so just to ask for access to information, to like
Mm.
internet is almost like a luxury. But I feel like
Mm.
it's not a luxury, it's like a basic basic right. So I feel like we somehow should try to provide that access to them, because there are so many
Mm.
things that you can learn from the internet for like mental health. You can
Yeah.
learn things that you're interested in, like human health. If you want to be a writer, you can learn from Coursera, EDX, how to write novel, how to tell your own stories. And by cutting off this group of people, like we're
Mhm.
doing a disservice to ourselves, because they might have like really amazing stories to tell. We're also doing a disservice to them because they don't have
Mm.
access to basic needs. So I feel like digital accessibility is really important for just everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, that is such a good point, especially for our many communities. Let's hopefully see a rise more in digital accessibility and storytelling, just similar to what we're doing here.
Mhm.
So, if our listeners would like to connect with you or see one of the many things you're working on, where can they find you? It's shameless plug. Tell us, how can
Mhm.
we connect with you, or where are you available?
Hmm. So I really, really dislike LinkedIn, but I'm trying to learn to
Mhm.
learn to be an advocate for myself. I
Mhm.
always see people, making a post and saying, "Oh my God, like I applied to so many jobs and now I got this amazing job here," which is really great, but it's always like a huge paragraph.
Yes.
And I'm like, no one's gonna read that. Like, it's amazing, good for you, but at the same time, it's a bit cringy.
Yeah.
Or like, or like, I'm so happy like my dad paid for my education and I graduated from med school, which is really great for you, but not very relatable for some people. So I always find it cringy, but with social media, it's
Mm,
easy to provide that access to everyone. Like you don't need to pay for social media. It's free. So I'm trying
mm.
to be better to go on LinkedIn so people can find me on LinkedIn. I'll
Perfect.
try not to post any cringy posts or anything. I keep it very simple so they can go on LinkedIn and find me. And my name is Cindy Christensen, so they can totally find me there, reach out to me anytime, and I can help them with like mentorship. If I don't know the answer, like I will find someone who knows the answer and try and help them as best as I can.
Thank you so much. You heard
Mhm.
it here. If you want to connect on LinkedIn. It won't be too cringy. I think you're allowed at least 2 cringy posts a year
Yeah.
and no one will complain at all.
Yeah.
As always, thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us. This was so beautiful to hear your story and just to experience everything with you. Later on, for everyone listening, we will be linking a little clip of Cindy's commencement speech because it's just wonderful and it'll be great to hear. So that'll come next. Thank you for listening. And as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cindy was kind enough to give us a written copy of her Harvard commencement speech. Please enjoy a dramatized reading. Enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you today and to be a part of this great celebration, the Harvard commencement of 2019. Despite having come from all walks of life and from various parts of the world, we are all gathered here today, together, not only to celebrate our achievements, but also to celebrate and to give thanks for the support from our friends and family members. Whether it's the people we've known for a long time, or people that have just recently came into our lives, they have all been a part of this challenging yet wonderful journey in helping us get here today. Like many of you, over the past few years, I have struggled to complete this degree. My journey started back in 2012 when I started taking one course at a time. I then took several breaks in between and eventually decided to officially enroll in the program in 2017. Throughout this period, I was working several jobs trying to pay off my student loans from a previous bachelor degree. As a young working professional in my 20s, I found it difficult to define myself and to find a field that I was truly passionate about. However, through Harvard Extension School, I was able to find the right balance between work and school and study something that I love. Over the course of my studies, there were many late nights or early mornings when I could no longer focus, but that voice inside my head told me to keep going. Because for me, completing this Harvard degree meant so much to me. It was my way to prove to myself that I belong here in this community as a first-generation immigrant. Coming from an immigrant family, my single mother did not even dare to dream that one day I would receive a college degree, let alone a Harvard master's degree. I often questioned myself if I really belonged here at the world's most famed and prestigious university. I am sure that every single one of us here today has a unique story, and that my story is not so different from yours. We all fought every single day, every single minute to be here today. No matter how hectic and stressful the world was outside, we stayed focused. With a world full of distractions, we took it one day at a time, handed in one assignment after another, passed one course after another until the day when we could walk across this stage as graduates. Looking out at all the faces here today, I can see the struggle, the pride, and the relief of my fellow grads and proudly say that we made it. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass once said that if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Completing our degrees should be viewed not as the ending, but rather the beginning of a new set of struggles to fight for our dreams, because we are not only living for ourselves, but for our friends, family, and future generations. Fight for what you believe in, whether it's combating climate change, reducing poverty, improving children's education, or protecting our history and sharing our culture with the world. Fight for what you believe in, not through violence, but with the education that you have attained here at Harvard. As Harvard graduates, we must use the education that we have received here to change the world for the better. Know that you are no longer alone, because we are now members of a network of alumni and friends all throughout the world. I will finish here today with a quote from our fellow alumni and one of the founding fathers, John Adams. To be good and to do good is all we have to do. Let us reflect on the past, recognize the present, and prepare for the future. Today is the beginning of our new and incredible journey as we embrace change and prepare to overcome the many hardships and challenges that lie ahead of us. Go on and do good. That is all you have to do. Congratulations to the Harvard Extension class of 2019. Thank you, Cindy Christensen.